Okay, everybody, so let's start. So this is the first time we also live stream via YouTube. And so I have to tell you, in case you're participating in the discussion here in the room, that your voice will be streamed. So just that you know, for data security reasons. So good evening, everybody. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here and also online. Thanks for your interest in this lecture series on Ukraine. A few of you I already know, or quite a few I have to say. So it's great to have you here again. I would like to welcome you also on behalf of my colleagues, Tetiana Skibina, who is here in the front, and also Martina Winkler, who unfortunately cannot be with us today, but she's online, and so she follows what we are doing. So warm welcome to everyone. Well, tonight's lecture aims to deepen our understanding of the military and non-military support for Ukraine, with a special emphasis on Germany's role. As this support depends on political will, we explore two interrelated questions. One, how does the support look like and develop over time? And two, what does it imply for domestic politics? Actually, when we agreed on this topic in the early summer this year, the Russian invasion had largely stalled, and the Ampel coalition, however you call this in English, was not well, but still alive. Since then, we have witnessed retreats of the Ukrainian army in Donetsk and the exit of the FDP from the coalition. So while Ukraine faces an urgent need for more support to counter Russian advances and also Russian missile attacks on civilians, our government's ability to act is severely compromised. And our outgoing chancellor, in the context of his re-election campaign, has pledged not to provide critical weapon systems essential for Ukraine to win the war and secure a just peace. So that's the background, that's the context, which I think makes today's discussion timely and relevant. So I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from our two speakers and then have a good discussion, even if our findings may not be overly optimistic. So let me introduce our speakers of today. Here to my left, Ivan Kharitonov will start by presenting the Ukraine Support Tracker, an initiative by the Kiel Institute for World Economics in an attempt to put policy decisions and public debate on a solid data basis. Ivan has been working for the Ukraine Support Tracker at the Kiel Institute for the last 2 years and has recently started as a doctoral researcher at the Peace Research Institute Frankfurt, where he focuses on defense economics and the arms trade. Ivan was so kind to step in after his colleague Pietro Bomprezzi, who had initially agreed to give this presentation and was on the posters you may have seen, after he received an urgent invitation to the Italian foreign minister to present the Ukraine Support Tracker. So that's an imminent topic. Thank you very much, Ivan, for stepping in, for coming to Kiel University tonight. Our second speaker here in the front is Christian Martin. Christian will subsequently discuss the political implications of the support for Ukraine. He's professor of comparative politics here at Kiel University, vice dean of our faculty, and Max Weber visiting chair at New York University. He's an expert for the German party system, but also for the international dimensions such as globalization. And I found one of his current research projects is The Future of Democracy in a Globalized World, which analyzes how our democracies are challenged both by undemocratic actors from within and by authoritarian regimes like China and Russia from outside. So this research fits perfectly to the questions we're going to address today. So thank you, Christian, for being here with us today. So let's start with Ivan's presentation of the Ukraine Support Tracker, and then Christian will take over. And finally, we're going to have time to ask questions and discuss.
Yeah, I think the micro is on now, and thank you very much for being here today. Thank you for warm introduction and warm welcoming. Unfortunately, yes, Pietro is cannot be here. He actually did already gave his talk. it was quite intense. I hope it's not going to get that intense here. Also, it's live streaming, so please be polite to me, don't ask tricky questions. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about Aid to Ukraine, and specifically about the project my colleagues and I have been working on for quite a few years at this point. So about Ukraine Support Tracker. I'm going to talk about who we are, what we do, why we do that. I'm also going to provide some key insights on what our results look like. And also I'm going to zoom in into Germany, how Germany helps Ukraine, how German government changed its behavior when it comes to military procurements as a reaction on this aid. And also will very briefly touch another project that our institute worked on, was a small policy brief on what could be the potential loss if Ukraine, for German economy, if Ukraine loses the war. I mean, we don't want that, but I mean, we have to estimate the potential consequences. So our data set includes data on 41 donor countries and one institutional donor, which is EU institutions. We collect data on government-to-government aid, so only bilateral aid that goes to Ukraine, meaning we do not account for private aid and some of the things that might look similar like to it. So, and our latest release covers data from 24th of January 2022 to August 31st, 2024. We distinguish between three types of aid: military, humanitarian, and financial. Military aid obviously includes weapons and equipment for Ukrainian armed forces, and sometimes it also includes funding for procurement projects to, again, be able to supply Ukraine with weapons. Humanitarian aid includes financial aid for humanitarian purposes and in-kind aid, such as relief aid, like medicine, food, mobile shelter, generators, etc., etc., etc. Everything that population in Ukraine might need right now. And I mean, needed before when the invasion started. Then we have financial aid, which includes grants, loans, and loan guarantees. And we also had one example of a swap line with Poland, but I mean, just yeah, an interesting fact. And so in order to collect this data, we rely on four types of sources. First one is official press releases issued by the governments. Second is government overview pages that kind of wrap up everything that was said in these press releases before. And third, we back these two sources up with any kind of legal documents, so budgetary documents, parliamentarian reports, anything that's being said in the parliament too, because usually it's being done by, let's say, ministries of defense, for example, and they testify, so this information counts as official. If we cannot find any of these sources, we rely on credible media sources. But it is important to say that because our data set is retroactive, which means that we update it also looking at the past entries, whenever we find additional sources that we can use to replace these media sources, we do that. So mostly our data set is backed up by official documents and official sources only. And as a result, we have our data set, which is one of a kind, a comprehensive data set on the aid to Ukraine. It is an important public good, first of all, and therefore it's been widely referenced by different news outlets. I mean, also important newspapers, as you can see here, like New York Times, BBC. We also frequently supply The Economist with our data set in advance before every release, so they can prepare their own assessment of the situation. Then it is an important decision-making tool. So it's we've seen Ukraine Support Tracker mentioned in multiple times during various parliamentarian discussions and even in parliamentarian reports. As you can see, just a few examples, like from Parliament of Australia, the Dutch Parliament, and the Canadian Parliament. And it's also widely used by different research units that do policy work, like as you can see here in Europe and in the US. But it's also not overlooked by the academic community. Here you can see the references to Ukraine Support Tracker for the last 2 years from Dimensions websites like Web of Science, but with more information there. And so why do we receive all this attention? Like, why is it important? What results do we have? What result do we get? here you can see the dynamics of aid to Ukraine, so monthly dynamics that compares United States with Europe. And by Europe here, we mean geographic Europe. So it includes European Union and other geographic European countries like UK, Iceland, Switzerland, and who's not in the EU, Norway, I think. But you get the point. And what it shows is that aid from US has slowly been declining for the last 2 years, since the beginning. So it was high, comparable with Europe, and then it's declining, and we don't know what's going to happen next, of course. With Europe, it is rather better because it is stable. So it's not declining, it just remained kind of the same throughout the longitude of the conflict. And another thing these graphs can tell us is if we combine both US and Europe, you will get more than 90% of all aid that is recorded in our data set. And so if you combine it, you can also see that, again, monthly averages, they kind of stay the same. So aid is neither decreasing on average, neither increasing nor decreasing in the end. For now, let's hope it will stay this way. So next thing is the way the aid is composed. So what are the components of aid? And as I said, military, humanitarian, financial. Here in red you can see military, in green you can see humanitarian, and in blue you can see financial. So this graph clearly shows us that military aid dominates, but financial aid is actually not that far away. So military aid, I think on average, monthly military aid is about 3.5 billion euros and financial 2.8 billion euros. The humanitarian aid is unfortunately, even though being important, is sort of neglected in the monetary, when we look at monetary values, because it's cheaper, way cheaper than military and financial aid. Like it's about $500 million per month, like if we can count averages, it's about $500 million. And now we can start talking about who does it. We've seen what is being done, and here we can see who is doing it. So top one donor, obviously from this graph, it's kind of expected that US will be top one donor, because here we compared it with a group of countries, and US is one single donor. So it's obviously on the very top. Then it's followed by EU institutions, Germany, United Kingdom, and Japan. If you distribute this bar here across countries from European Union, the ranking is gonna stay the same. So I can show it to you on a different chart, but you can just also trust me on this one. Another thing is that this ranking technically remained kind of stable for the last a year, I think. You can also get a pretty good idea of who is in the top. But these are absolute values, right? So of course US is going to be on top. US is a big economy. Of course Germany is going to be on top. Germany is smaller but still big. What's going to happen if we normalize it by GDP? So what if we look at the relative values? So here we use pre-war GDP, pre-war GDP of 2021 to normalize it, to normalize aid provided to Ukraine from different countries. And as you can see here, northern countries and Eastern European countries provide higher share of their GDP when it comes to helping Ukraine. It is especially striking if you look at the Baltics, which is probably not surprised because they might feel threatened by certain country on the east. Right, northern countries, they also, might be very much affected by the Russian aggression if, God forbid, something worse happens to Ukraine. Also you can see that Poland and Slovakia provide rather higher shares of their economy to Ukraine. And from this graph, you probably noticed that, from this obviously, but from here too, probably noticed that across donors, the composition of aid is also very much similar. So military aid dominates, except for Japan, Canada, and EU institutions. If I prolong this list, it's also going to look the same. So most donors, they focus on military aid in the end. Therefore, it's not surprisingly, I mean, US was top one donor. It's not surprising that US also leads in military aid. Sometimes it was not the case. So for a brief moment, Europe overtook. And here we also compare Europe as a whole, that is a geographic unit. EU members and institutions still lag behind if we don't account other European countries. So for a brief moment, when US had this budget, wouldn't call it a crisis, but it was a crisis in the end. Yeah, so they had problems with fiscal year budget and they couldn't pass the bill. I mean, maybe you remember it was passed like this year, which is like crazy, the budget for the finishing fiscal year. Anyway, so yeah, for a brief moment, Europe overtook, but then US kind of caught up with it. The European Union, on the other hand, and other European countries are very important when it comes to financial aid. So as you can see here, European institutions alone provide almost twice the size of what US provides. And if you, I mean, it's not including the individual financial aid from the donors, from members of the European Union. So if you kind of, gather this up together and put it here, it's going to be even more. One thing to notice here is that EU provides mostly loans, when US gives grants, which are essentially free money. I mean, of course, the loans from the European Union are on very favorable terms. US doesn't pay interest on them yet. Maybe will not. I mean, we don't know that. But I mean, technically, these are loans. So we need to account for this too. Another feature that that US doesn't have is the long-term planning capability. So EU budget has 5-year, if I'm not wrong, 5-year kind of planning horizon. And so EU can do all these long-term pledges, including this EU-Ukraine facility, this 50 billion facility that was announced last year in June and was only approved in February. Maybe you remember there was like this, I mean, many headlines about Hungary blocking aid to Ukraine. Well, this is it. Hungary was blocking it for quite a while, but eventually it passed. And so this graph shows you in dashed line, this is what is planned to be given to Ukraine in the future. And this is what was already given, either to be given very soon or was given already. And it's not the case with the US, as you can see. So US operates on the fiscal year budget planning horizon, and they don't have that much funds left. I mean, it's just until August, as I said, the end of August, so probably it's even higher now. So it really depends on the decision that Trump administration will make, whether this dashed line goes up or stays the same. And I mean, we talk a lot about monetary value, how it's all being composed together in comparable numbers, but what it is essentially, how aid looks like essentially in the nutshell. So we did this little chart to kind of demonstrate it to you. So because some people don't really understand how it works. Funnily enough, we even get these questions from the journalists, like, oh yeah, is it just being wired to the Central Bank of Ukraine, like to the bank account of Zelensky or whatever, the financial aid, I mean? No, of course not. It goes through different multilateral and international institutions, mostly through IMF and World Bank, and it goes in the Ukrainian Central Bank and then being used to subsidize the budget of Ukraine, but for civilian purposes only. So to pay, I don't know, pensions, salaries to doctors and teachers. Yeah, so as I said, for civilian purposes only. The humanitarian, because these organizations, they very strictly control it. Humanitarian aid is a mixture between physical and monetary aid, as I mentioned before. So the financial part, so grants for construction, etc., goes also through international organizations, not through IMF and World Bank, but rather through different NGOs and maybe some governmental frameworks. And they end up in municipal budgets or regional budgets. in the end, so they don't go to the main, the state budget of Ukraine. Another part of humanitarian aid is a relief aid, which is physical aid, so in-kind aid, and it comes to Ukraine in the form of food, shelter, medicines, everything that might be used to help suffering population there. And military aid is just physical, as I think I also mentioned. It's only physical, so even if Ukraine gets like virtual money from France, let's say like 200 million fund for procurement, Ukraine comes over to France and says like, France, I need this, this, and that, and France buys it and sends it to Ukraine from local industry, of course. So Ukraine in the end gets physical objects that it can be used to defend itself against Russian aggression. Another important aspect, as some people usually neglect, and we used to neglect it up to quite a few weeks ago, I don't know, just a few weeks ago, is how aid is being distributed across Ukraine. Because you think of Ukraine as this like unified body, and okay, aid goes to Kiev and then it stopped there. It's actually not the case. I mean, obviously military aid goes here. I mean, yeah, we don't know where exactly. Yeah, but what happens to humanitarian aid, for example? And this is the map that shows you how reconstruction aid is being distributed across Ukraine, because it's very transparent and you can put it on the map. And so what was surprisingly to me is that countries don't hesitate to invest in reconstruction of cities bordering battlefields. But of course, a very significant part of aid still goes to Kiev region, which is, of course, also not surprisingly because it's being heavily bombed. I mean, as other cities, of course, you can see. Probably if you might be a good idea to put, like missile strikes over it. So yeah, maybe we will also do that. It's just like a recent thing we did. Yes, and finally, when people hear about aid to Ukraine, and I mean aid to any country, to be honest, they usually hear it from the news. So they read these newspaper headlines that says, "Oh, U.S. is about to give you $60 billion to Ukraine," and they think, "Okay, it's gonna go there tomorrow." Some of them do, unfortunately, and so it's not the case. A very good example is the fourth bar here, December 2022, when US appropriated additional funds to assist Ukraine. And you can see how it was slowly, step by step, allocated and disbursed up to the beginning of this year. It goes to negative because US do some weird accounting tricks, but we also account for it in our data set, so don't worry about it. It's just on the graph, it's shown like this. And now, as we talked about, how do other countries help Ukraine, like the goal, like bigger picture, and what tools do they use to do that? We can shift to what Germany does specifically. So from this ranking graph, you might remember that Germany was second country donor. So like it was third in the ranking, but the second donor was European institutions. And Germany is actually second country donor and first European donor. EU, European, doesn't matter. So second after the US. Don't be confused with this yellow line here. These are Nordic countries combined together. They're here for a different purpose. I just did not delete them. But I highlighted Germany in bold, so you have to give me credit for that. And so yeah, Germany dominates the ranking. I mean, the ranking of helping Ukraine. So Germany is the top one donor, and it wasn't like this all the time, right? UK was a bigger deal at some point, most of the points. Yeah, but it's true for total aid and for military aid. Again, ignore the yellow line. And so, what exactly Germany gives? So I prepared this funny colored graph with pictures of weapons to kind of give you a perspective of what Germany gives exactly, like bigger stuff. So Germany so far either promised to deliver soon or I mean, in the nearby perspective, already delivered 66 tanks, 140 mortar infantry fighting vehicles, 73 howitzers, which some of them are made in Germany, like Panzer howitzers. Some of them are being procured in the European framework, like Susanna howitzers from Slovakia. And 8 multiple rocket launcher systems. They all, I think, come from Bundeswehr stocks, and they're US made. And 27 air defense systems that, yeah, I mean, like Patriots and Iris-Ts. And I mean, one figure here is supposed to represent each 10 units. So it can't be really seen here, but I mean, half the tank means half, like 5. I mean, but 6 in this case, anyway. Yeah, I know, sorry, I'm explaining you the kindergarten pictures. Sorry for that. It's not the kind of presentation you expect. But I mean, as I said, Pietro is in Rome doing a very important thing. And so after giving all this stuff, you might think that, okay, German government has to change its procurement policy. It has to replenish the stocks. It has to prepare for maybe giving more aid to Ukraine. And we in Kiel Institute did another project that I also was a part of. And we tracked the procurement from the German government placed from January 2020 to mid of this year. And it actually hasn't increased that dramatically. I mean, if you draw like a trend line, it's gonna go like, not like this, not that sharp, like maybe like this. Yes, so what changed, however, was the procurement policy. You see, before that, Germany focused more on the air forces and naval forces. And after it, Germany started focusing on procuring systems for the land forces, like tanks, howitzers, even air defense systems. And even in the other category, you see it's like, well, 13 billion for military vehicle maintenance. So kind of still goes to land forces. Yes, but unfortunately, if we account for everything that has been given to Ukraine and is about to be given to Ukraine, Germany will only increase its stockpiles when we talk about tanks. When we talk about infantry fighting vehicles, the amount of stockpiles will not increase that dramatically. For artillery howitzer, I mean, these are just comparable howitzers, so some of them include also, as I said, stuff procured in the European framework, but just for the comparison reason, we put them together. They're not going to literally decrease in this case, but I mean, you can see the picture is quite dramatic in the end, even if you say, okay, let's exclude these Susanna howitzers and other howitzers that are not being procured from, not being used from either stocks or from the local industry, and with their defense. So Germany will end up with the same size of their air defense, howitzer and infantry fighting vehicles capabilities. And it is a problem because if it stays this way, then it's going to be harder to defend itself and help defending Ukraine. And as I said in the very beginning, I'm also going to briefly touch what happens if Germany stops. Let's say Germany stops, and being top one donor, it can have very problematic consequences. Let's say Germany stops, and then Ukraine, not because of this, but maybe a coincidence, let's say, what happens if Ukraine loses? What happens if Russia succeeds in taking over Ukraine? Then just for German economy, the consequences will be even more severe than what Germany sends to Ukraine right now. So from 10 to 20 times more severe consequences. When I mean, this graph was calculated by our colleagues in the institute, and it shows the percent of GDP that Germany will have to spend, or Germany spends now on helping Ukraine on average per year, and Germany will have to spend if Russia takes over Ukraine. Yeah, with this rather triggering and intriguing graph, I leave it up for the discussions and for your questions. So thank you so much for your attention. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and yeah. Yeah.
how you can tell a political scientist from an economist, right? The political scientist will use PowerPoint, and you tagged your slides.
It's actually also PowerPoint.
Oh, but then you turn it into a PDF.
Yeah,
That's that. I call that.
I wanted to make it LaTeX, but then
I call that cheating. Yeah, sure. It's already unmuted. You should be able to hear me now. The battery's just low, but I think for the room it will be fine. I don't know for the live streaming. So thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and to talk a little bit about the political implications for Germany. We talk about support for Ukraine, and I think one thing that is important to note is sort of a hinge between the two presentations, how incredibly cheap German support is to Ukraine, even as the second largest donor. I mean, we're talking to the tune of like, what, 18 billion euros? Okay? 18 billion over 2.5 years. Just to give you a comparison figure, so each year Germany spends about 25 billion euros, that's the figure for 2023, on Bürgergeld, so subsidies for people who are the least capable of participating in the labor market. Right now, you'd say it's 25 billion. Is that a lot, or is that not a whole lot, or how much is that? Well, I mean, if you look at the total social budget, so that's all of the social transfers that are being paid for in Germany, the Bürgergeld, so this basic subsidy, amounts to about 4.5% of that total, right? So now you get a tiny little sense of how little money Germany actually spends, even as the second largest donor overall, to support Ukraine. I think it's important to put these things into perspective. And we also saw the scenario for a possible Russian victory in Ukraine, how much more expensive that would be. And I think it's actually a pretty optimistic estimate that Germany will only take a hit of 2% to its GDP. I think it's got to be a whole lot more. But that's speculation at this point. I want to start you off by giving you a general sense of how the military is viewed in Germany. This is from the Party Manifesto project. So what they do is they code party manifestos, and they do that over time. This one here starts in 1990 and goes to the most recent observation. And they look through these programs and code it as pseudo sentences. So if you have a mention in this case of the military, is it positive or negative, right? And then they just count it. And you see how there's quite a bit of variation there over time, and the colors are terrible, but overall you see that it's since 2020 it goes up a little, or since the mid 2010s. So this is the CDU, CSU. They view the military quite positively. More interestingly, the Greens, right? They start from a low level. They didn't mention the military at all, and then they now they view it more positively. And the same is true for other parties, with the exception of the left. The BSW, the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, the most recent addition to the German party system, isn't covered here. So this gives you a sense of the overall sentiment in the German political discussion when it comes to matters military. These are party positions of the parties in Germany, including the BSW. So this is from the most recent Chapel Hill expert survey. Unlike the Party Manifesto data that I just showed you, political scientists are asked to give an evaluation of the general party positions of, in this case, German parties. So you receive an email. Could you please place the following parties on these two dimensions? What are these two dimensions? Well, we have an economic dimension. That's our left-right scale. So here is more redistribution. Here is less redistribution. Here is more state intervention into the economy. Here's less. Economic, classic left-right position. And then the vertical axis is societal dimension, where the political conflict is mainly about migration, but not exclusively. So here would be more restrictive immigration policies. Here would be more liberal immigration policies, but it also covers other issues like abortion, marriage equality. In the US, you would have on this dimension, on the vertical dimension, gun ownership. That's not relevant for Germany, but it gives you a general sense of where the political parties are. I drew this graph because what stands out is the BSW. That's Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, as I said, the most recent addition to the German party system. And it is unusual because you find this position in the upper left quadrant. You find that only in Eastern European transformation countries. You find it nowhere in Western European countries. I went through all of them because I couldn't believe it, but you don't find that anywhere. If you go to Poland, you have the peace there. If you go to Slovakia, you have a bunch of parties there. If you go to the Czech Republic, so the basic structure of the party system in Western European countries is from the bottom left to the top right. In Eastern European countries, it's the exact opposite. It goes from the top left to the bottom right. This here, the BSW, is a big exception. And I'm mentioning this because it makes me doubtful as to the future of this party in the general election in Germany. In my opinion, they are fighting an uphill battle, and I'm not convinced they will make it over the 5% threshold. I've been wrong with more than one prediction in the past. I will mention this just as a disclaimer. We'll see how this one pans out. Don't hold me accountable if you place a bet and you lose it. So this is a question, this refers to the German public. So this is November 2024, hot off the press. Should military support by the West, that's important to you for Ukraine, be enhanced, reduced, or should it stay the same? 43% of the German population, that's a representative sample, answered that the West should do more, right? I found that quite surprising because I did not expect it. I thought that most people would say, okay, up until, as it has been up until now, 27% say that, and 24% of the respondents in Germany say it should be less. So a quarter say it should be reduced. However, if you look at the data for a survey question that is a bit differently worded, it asks, what do you think about the current support of Germany for Ukraine? So not the West collectively, but of Germany. Then you get a somewhat different picture. 26% respond, it's too little. So this should correspond to the 43% here that say to the different question, it should be more, right? So that doesn't quite pan out, but still 42% say it's just right, together with the 26% that say it should be more. That's still a very solid majority to do at least as much as what Germany is doing right now. That's actually good news. Okay, so the level of support for Ukraine in the German population is high, no matter at what kind of data you look at. This is a representation of the most important political problem as perceived by the German population. I picked out only 3 to make it a little less cluttered. And you see, there's one topic, that's the green one, that goes sort of up and down, and it has, until very recently, been perceived as the most important problem in Germany. That's migration. The economy has overtaken migration as the most important political problem in the most recent November 22 and one round before that survey round. Okay, so these are the 2 most important political questions as perceived by the general German public. However, Ukraine, the war on Ukraine, it's worded as Ukraine/war/Russia. So it's, but this is what it is about. Of course, it peaked in February 2022, and there was another peak. It goes down, it comes up again, and now it's on the upswing again. But it's still, it's only perceived by about 18% of the German population as the most important problem. Other issues have overtaken the war on Ukraine in the perception of the German population as the most important problem. That may be good or that may be bad. That's something that we are going to discuss now, because here are the political party positions, and then we can think about what that means for the upcoming general election. So this is a recent statement by the SPD group in the German Bundestag. I'm not going to translate the whole thing. I will just mention that they talk about, yes, we are willing to deliver weapons so that Ukraine can defend its territory and its sovereignty. They also talk about peace. They talk about a peace at of equal partners. At the same time, they emphasize the große Besonnenheit. So I don't even know how to translate that of Olaf Scholz and his federal government. So their measured way of looking at things, right? So this is something that they emphasize. By the way, October 8th, we still had a functioning government back then. So that was before the coalition broke. Let's see what will happen over the next few weeks. This is the CDU. Their most recent statement on Ukraine that I could find is from February 2024. So they are here in the last part. In the first part, they basically say the same thing that the SPD claims, but here they say Germany should do more, especially those Taurus missiles should be delivered, made available to Ukraine. That is also something that the Greens are advocating for. We know that from debates in the coalition. What I find remarkable here, if you look at this quote, is that they give a humanitarian reason for supporting Ukraine. So this is worded, the statement of the Green Party, the Green Group in the federal parliament is worded in a very morally grounded fashion. This is not realpolitik, right? Even if the consequences are in support of military support, the reasons why the Greens are for it are very much in line with the Green history, going all the way back to support for the NATO deployment to Kosovo that almost tore the Green Party apart. This is different, right? This is the BSW, that's the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht. So no more German tax money for a senseless war. Stop the escalation in favor of a ceasefire and peace negotiations. Yada, yada, yada. I mean, you know the idea. This is what this platform or what this party thrives on. They claim to be the party of peace that can make sure that Germany does not suffer from a possible escalation. I think this is what it's all about. And we have seen that this is not a majority position in the German population. So we had an interesting 2 weeks as political scientists and people living in this country in general. And the question we're all asking is who's going to win the federal elections that are, if all goes well, are scheduled for, they're not scheduled yet. We just think they're going to happen on February 23rd next year. And there's actually very little movement in the polling data. The most recent polls are highlighted in red. That's from, which day is today? That's from today. No, 2 days before today. And 3 days before today, CDU at about a third of the votes, SPD at around 15%, the Greens 11, 12, FDP, the left party, not in the federal parliament, at least not across the 5% threshold. For the AfD, probably going to be, as it stands now, the second strongest party, and the BSW, that's the interesting difference between the two polls Here they're at 4%, would not be represented in the federal parliament. For this poll, they're at 7.5. The honest assessment of this is we simply don't know. Okay, could go either way. It's also perfectly possible that the left party and the FDP will be represented in the federal parliament. We just don't know yet. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and this has consequences for the coalition building process. But I would bet good money on the fact that the next chancellor is from the CDU, right? I mean, a third versus 15%, that's a lot of catch up that they have to play. But of course, an exogenous shock could change that. So let's say we have a major attack by an Islamist terrorist on a Christmas market over the next few weeks. That could easily propel the AfD to 25%, right? And the whole game is changed. So, but my money would still be on the CDU. And that would mean that support for Ukraine would probably continue the way it is now. But this is still the chancellor, right? This is Olaf Scholz. You all know him. This gentleman you might also recognize. This is Helmut Schmidt. Does anybody know who this is? Rolf Mützenich. He is the whip of the SPD group in the federal parliament. And Rolf Mützenich and Helmut Schmidt, I put them there because they represent the two souls that are within the Social Democratic Party. Helmut Schmidt is famous for, or infamous, some people might say, for pushing through the NATO double-track decision in the late 1970s against the resistance within his own party. And it was, you could argue that this is what cost him his chancellorship. He was a very stern proponent of armament in Germany because he saw a strategic imbalance with the view of the deployment of Soviet Union missiles in Eastern Europe. And he basically pushed the Americans to bring their Pershings and cruise missiles to Germany and to other Western European countries against, again, the stiff opposition of his own party and large parts of German society. And I'm mentioning this because, first of all, Rolf Mützenich is of a generation, and politically he was engaged in the so-called peace movement, so the societal groups that were against the NATO double-track decision that involved putting mid-range missiles into Western Europe, but also because he is an important supporter as of now for Olaf Scholz, who has to find his political way between these two poles within his party. There is the reality of German foreign policy making in Europe in a security environment that has fundamentally changed at the very latest with February 2022. You could argue that it had already changed with the war on Georgia in 2008, and the war in Crimea on Ukraine and the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia. But that's maybe a different debate. But with February 2022, it's obvious that Germany's security environment had changed. So that's and you have to take that into consideration if you are the chancellor. But within the German system, political parties matter. They are very strong. You cannot be the chancellor against your own party for very long. And within the SPD, the Social Democratic Party, we have factions that are not in favor of giving more military aid to Ukraine. They are factions that don't even support being in NATO. They're not very strong. But they are there, and every chancellor of the SPD must take that into account. So in a way, the CDU chancellor has a much easier way of coming up with additional support for Ukraine. So what's going to happen? What's going to be the future of German support for Ukraine? I think that Germany will continue its support for Ukraine at current levels, at the very least, and might even deliver Taurus and other longer-range missiles. Just like everybody else in Europe is now doing it or allowing their use. I think sooner or later Germany is going to come along. I also think that Germany will continue supporting refugees from Ukraine, but the calls for cutting spending, they will increase. Put them to work sooner, or why should people from Lviv be in Germany? They're safe there. So we've heard this on and off. I think these calls will become stronger. If Donald Trump follows through with his announcements, of which nobody really knows what they're going to amount to, but it seems that the US will cut back support. I would be interested in your assessment of that. Germany will not be willing or able to replace US support. I mean, the numbers are just not there. And Germany will also not stand in the way of a possible US-led freezing of the war. So if Donald Trump takes a ruler and Putin and they draw a line. This is the future zone of demarcation. Germany has simply no way or political will to stand in the way of such a solution. That is not a real solution, of course, but will freeze the conflict for the time being. Germany will certainly not be quick to support Ukraine's accession to NATO. I think the sentiment in the German population speaks against that. The German population has a deep-seated fear of being drawn into a conflict, disregarding the fact that Germany, of course, is already part of this conflict, but the German population doesn't want to be drawn into it any deeper. And finally, and that's a truism, I mean, Germany will have to spend a lot more on its own security and that of its NATO partners. That was already clear before the US elections and has become painfully clear now. And this will be the context in which German support for Ukraine is going to develop. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, both of you. So I would just open the floor for questions and discussions. I mean, I have written a lot, but I don't want to dominate here. So if there are questions from the audience, go ahead. Anna.
I have a couple, but short. Thank you. First to Ivan, if I may. So about your data procurement, do you use Oryx or CIT or some sources like that, like OSINT sources that really try to dig through the satellite imagery and really see that the aid is there where it's supposed to be?
May I answer right away? Yeah. No, unfortunately not. I mean, not unfortunately. We don't have a direct assessment of what's going on there, but this is specific of our work that we do not rely on any open source intelligence sources. Okay. They can be unreliable, they can be reliable, we don't know that. This is the problem. Whether official documents, at least this is how people do it in economics, they tell you, I mean, if it's about, if it's about small arms, of course they're going to be, packed in the crates and we couldn't find them. But I mean, big stuff is usually hard to hide, and there are also multiple other projects that rely on similar data like CIPRI, and there is also this United Nations Register for Conventional Arms, UN-ROCA, which they also receive official information from the governments regarding these flows, which we also take into account. But no, as I said, no open source intelligence is being used.
All right. And a quick follow-up. A quick follow-up. So you mentioned that military aid is only physical.
Yeah.
Right. But then I saw that there was a big item which is maintenance of. How is it like? It's just like a booking
Yeah.
problem in my mind.
Yeah, it was from, it's a different project. It's, well, we checked German procurement policy. So it wasn't about helping Ukraine. So the maintenance part was not just for the Bundeswehr itself. So not even the part of the Ukraine support tracker, just,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Thank you very much. One quick to Professor Martin. Okay, so this is I'm very excited about. I recently acquired German citizenship, so I'm going to vote, yay, for the first time in my life. And now we're here. So nice first try. So as a person with a target function to maximize Ukraine support, I will probably have to vote CDU. I don't know. It's painful. But the question to you is. How do you really evaluate these statements from Merz, rather as opposition to Scholz's stance or missing thereof, or a real, call to action?
I think the numbers are there, that his statements can be interpreted as actual calls to action. I think a Chancellor Merz would be more supportive of Ukraine. Of course, he wouldn't follow through on everything he said while in an opposition role, but I think that the Taurus delivery would have happened under Merz. That said, I think you could also vote for the Greens, right? Who have been very forthcoming, but just couldn't, within that coalition, they didn't stand a chance of really getting everything that they wanted.
Perhaps I would like to ask a follow-up question on that. For me, extremely interesting thing is how peacefully the AfD is. At least that's what they are saying. So they are having posters as peace party now. What has happened to the German right? I mean, they were. I mean, Germany has a very infamous history of militarism, and now they do this. So how do we square that? So how to understand it? Or is it for real? I mean,
it's a good question. I don't think the AfD fits the old mold of far-right parties. Right? They are an extremist far-right populist party, and they will say whatever they think they can. Will give them additional support from the German population. And I mean, I showed you the aggregate numbers for all of Germany. If you look into East Germany, the numbers would look differently. And we saw this with the electoral results in the state elections in Brandenburg, Thuringia, and Saxony, where the BSW, with their peace stance, was very successful, as was the AfD. There's one idiosyncrasy about the AfD. A lot of their supporters are of Russian-German origin, right? And they have a soft spot for Putin. There's no other way of saying it. So they are hesitant to call for more action against Russia.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so more questions from the audience. So
that's a question to both Mr. Kharitonov and Professor Martin. Well, I'm interested in political economy and the allocation of funds, also regarding austerity policies. And if you could answer, do you generally keep up with the needs or requests of the Ukrainian government, of the population, like especially in terms of the challenges that come in the progress of war and educational areas, or in terms of children, women development and security?
So the question is whether support to Ukraine actually responds to the needs of the people in Ukraine, right?
Yeah, it's one aspect for sure, and also does the content of the aid develop with time?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, it's very hard to tell exactly. I mean, we don't have any metrics of what Ukraine population like needs. I mean, no one like standardized, let's say, measurement of it. But for example, when it comes to humanitarian aid, it is rather more flexible than, I mean, financial aid is universal. I mean, it just helps budget of Ukraine. I mean, it's up to Ukraine to decide which areas of Ukrainian society need this money more. Humanitarian aid is rather flexible on the donor levels, so countries tend to really send more things that Ukrainian population need. Like, for example, when Russia started bombarding energy infrastructure, these countries, I mean, donor countries started sending more generators, for example, light bulbs, I don't know, like some components for energy grid systems, etc., etc., etc. We cannot say whether it was sufficient enough or not. It's not the scope of our research, unfortunately. And the similar thing happened with military aid. So when these missile attacks started happening, we've also seen countries starting to send more air defense systems. Again, we cannot say whether it was sufficient or not a scope for research, but the reaction is there, so they react on what's going on. Yeah, I think. Christian, was it just for me, or sorry?
I
It
really
was
don't have
general
anything to add.
for the
I wouldn't know.
for the podium. Well, I'm also interested if it covers also the social area, also in covering the fundamental rights, like education or children development, for example. Do you have data or information on this aspect?
Not really. I think
also.
Yeah, I mean, I think it when we talk about these aspects, they are mostly will be focused on refugees, right? Ukrainian refugees in Germany. And I forgot to mention that we do not count refugee aid in our baseline figures. Therefore, we would be able to say whether it meets needs of children and educational needs, etc.
That would have been one of my questions. So if you add refugee aid to the numbers, is that a large fraction? Let's say for Germany, any numbers on that?
So yes, we have some estimates on that, and it shifts the ranking towards in favor of countries that received way more refugees than others, like Poland and Germany. I mean, I have a slide, I think, in the presentation. I might not have it. I don't remember. It's in the appendix. So yes, it does change, but not like significantly. I mean, Germany will still remain, because of the highest share of refugees in Germany. Germany will still remain among the top one European donor. Will change the picture for Poland, for example, dramatically, because Poland will, just launch into space in the ranking. I mean, hitting Germany probably, but not overpassing it.
Hello.
Okay. So we have a next question.
Yes, exactly. I have a question regarding Anna's comment and to Professor Martin regarding the voting. So what I was thinking is, if we look at the data that you provided, it's pretty clear that Friedrich Merz is going to be the next chancellor. But I think for Ukraine, the most important or interesting thing is, how will the coalition look like? And I think there is the interesting part of the voting, because if we would have the most likely scenario with SPD, we would have, this, you said it yourself, the struggle with some parts not wanting to, bring the military help. But if we would have, for example, enough Green voters, then we might have a coalition of 3 parties. And then the chance would actually increase. I mean, the worst scenario would probably be with AfD. So yeah, I wouldn't say that it's so like paper clear that CDU is the best vote, because they're gonna have the chancellor anyway. So maybe it's more about to vote for the like best partner in that case. So without giving like advice, but it just, like from the point of view, what's the best vote for people who want to be strategic and for whom Ukraine plays a very important role.
No, of course, I agree. Then again, I mean, even if this SPD makes it into a coalition government as a junior partner, they won't resist very much. It's more a problem for an SPD chancellor, right? I think that's a minor issue. And again, it's not a whole lot of money, right? It's not one of the big spending tickets, like, you know, the social pensions or the pension system that has to be funded. I mean, it's true, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and soon you're talking about real money, but it's really not a whole lot. And the alternative would be way more costly. We saw that in your last slide. I'm sorry, but then again, you know, sorry. The real question is, what are the United States are going to do? They are the ones that provide the bulk of the aid, especially the military aid. And without the US, I don't see Ukraine standing a chance. I'm sorry to say that. Germany will not be able to or willing to fill the gap.
Okay, next question. Yeah, to the right.
Yeah, I have a question about the estimates for the output gap contraction of Germany. You showed us in the last slide. Which kind of model did you use, and what assumptions did you think of to show these rather steep 2% impact on Germany, which is a nice clear number? Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't a very sophisticated model. I mean, it wasn't a model, to be honest, in general. These are just, I don't remember exactly the figures that my colleagues used to estimate it, but they took into account the increase for for refugees that might inflow again if Russia overtakes Ukraine. They took into account even higher increase in military spendings. If, I mean, Russia starts basically knocking on the door of European Union, everyone will have to increase its military spendings. And they also take into account trade losses. I mean, trade losses from trading with Ukraine. Yes, I think these are like 3 components. They were included in these 1 or 2% yearly losses over the next 5 years. So it's really, how do I put it? It's really a very,
with a grain of salt.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not the forecast that says that it's gonna happen for sure if it happens, but it's based on some numbers that we have. I mean, if an exogenous shock happens, and I mean, Ukraine loses and then more refugees come than anticipated, of course it's gonna be higher. If less refugees comes over, then, you know, and if some additional costs appear that we didn't think about, it's going to go higher too. So, you know, it's hard to take everything into account.
Thank you.
Perhaps one sentence on that. If we look back into the history of German military spending in the 70s or 80s, for example, it was way higher than what we have today. And part of the problems we currently have with our military are I guess there are many problems, but part of the problem is reduced military spending, and that's what we are seeing now. And once we are back, I mean, in a sense, we are already back to the previous threats, but we haven't realized, and we are still hoping for the US, I think. But if Ukraine really loses and Putin stands at our doors, I guess at least we will have to return to where we come from, and that's I think already like 1.5 percentage point of GDP, which we have to spend more on military just to be back where we are, and that doesn't include all the new stuff we probably have to do. I mean, we are seeing on the battlefield now that wars have changed. And we also know that the mindset of German military is not changing fast in most dimensions. So this will also need a lot of investment, I guess.
I would like to add to this. Thank you. So one piece of information to illustrate this. During the Cold War, 70s, 80s, the budget of the defense ministry in West Germany was always the second largest after the budget for the Ministry for Labor and Social Transfers, or whatever it is called. So this, now if you look at the numbers, it's somewhere, it's hard, you can hardly find it in the budget because the peace dividend, Germany has come to rely on the so-called peace dividend. And it's hard to get back from that because it requires redistribution between the different items in the budget. So that's one thing. The second thing, money spent on the military is not lost. It's not like you dig a hole and you put in the 100 billion euros and then you put and then you dig again. This money goes somewhere. And I think it's actually an opportunity for the German industry to ease the transformation that the German industry is currently experiencing. And for an OECD country, German value added in industrial production is unusually high. There is only one other country in the OECD that has similar levels, and that's South Korea. Right? So there is a necessity to, not even talking about climate catastrophe or climate crisis, but there's a necessity to transform the German model. So, and the third thing that I would like to add is, and that's something that we, in my opinion, we talk way too little about in Germany. You mentioned we're relying on the US. What is it about the US that we are relying on? We are relying on their logistics, on their industrial capacity, but first and foremost, we are relying on the fact that the United States provides a nuclear umbrella over Western Europe, including Germany. And if that is no longer reliable, then the whole equation changes, right? Then nuclear threats by an aggressor like Putin become credible, and Germany would have no other way than caving, because we have nothing to match that. And I'm convinced that France would not be willing to sacrifice Paris for Berlin. So if you think this through to its logical conclusions, it means that, and if we take European strategic sovereignty seriously, it means that Europe, if possible, if at all possible, together, but if not, then by necessity, Germany has to do it alone, has to develop nuclear capabilities and the means of deploying nuclear weapons. It pains me to say that, but it is the reality that we are facing. And I think it's important to recognize that and not to shy away from that conclusion, and hopefully steer it in a direction that allows us for a common European response.
And which party's position is that? Which party should I vote then?
There are certain voices in the CDU, but they're, even in the CDU, they are fringe, right? Because as soon as you say nuclear, the German public goes apeshit.
But to add on that, so from your view, we had Helmut Schmidt, and he represented a large fraction of the SPD. So from your view today, so where did all the Schmidts go? Did they leave the SPD, or are they just in the minority? What's your take on that?
It's a very interesting development. Part of the peace movement became the Greens, right? And the Greens are now the party that is one of the most, or if not the most staunch supporter of Ukraine and of military action in general, if it is based on humanitarian considerations, on what they call a rules-based international order, right? So they at least part of the peace movement have gone to the Greens, and part of the Greens are now in favor of military, of a stronger military stance. And then other parts, they have remained within the SPD, and we're happy to bank the peace dividend to enact these social redistribution programs, which is perfectly fine. I mean, that's what the SPD is about, right? It's a party, it's a social democratic party. They should be in favor of social transfers. It was under the specific conditions of the Cold War that someone like Helmut Schmidt, and the three-party system, that someone like Helmut Schmidt could rise to this role of not only the CEO of West Germany Incorporated, but also someone who had the strategic foresight and was able to push the Americans into deploying their missiles. Because at first, the US, they did not want to do that, right? It was not on their radar. It was Schmidt who made them, who talked them into taking this threat seriously. Strategic structural conditions have changed. I think that will be my answer. And if you look at the Greens, in very surprising ways. I mean, one of the founding pillars of the Green Party is the peace movement. They were the party of peace, Frieden schaffen ohne Waffen, right? And Helmut Kohl, the CDU guy, was laughed at because he came up with the slogan Frieden schaffen mit immer weniger Waffen. So not even the CDU could say we need more weapons, we need to have more armaments so we can show the Soviets that they cannot outspend us. This is what Reagan did, and Thatcher. In Germany, in West Germany, this was a no-go. Even the Conservative Party could not support such a stance. Things have really changed.
Okay, thank you very much. More questions? I don't see questions from the audience, so I have. Okay, can you pass the?
Thank you. I don't really know how to phrase this. So maybe how do you evaluate this argument that we now have that Germany has to, that it's going to cost Germany a lot if Ukraine loses in the run-up to the election as a political argument to support the war. But shouldn't we maybe place the argument on the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine and that it's like a humanitarian, it's a need that Germany supports Ukraine. And I feel it's a very German argument to say, oh, but it's going to cost Germany a lot if Ukraine loses. How do you evaluate this political discourse that is going in this way? Do you know what I want to say?
I know what you mean, and I think you're right. Of course, it is very German in a way, but it's also very German in a way to base the support on very, very general principles of international relations, right? So I would say, whatever works, whatever gets the job done and hopefully leads us to a foreign policy that does the right thing. And doing the right thing is not in contradiction with the German interests. On the contrary, having a rules-based international order is in the German interest, and fighting those who are opposed to this rules-based international order is in Germany's interest. And if it's an easier political sell to show what it would cost Germany if Ukraine lost, then so be it, right? Just have to get past this electoral campaign, form a hopefully stable new government, and then see what we can do in the face of changed international conditions with the election of Donald Trump to the presidency.
Yeah, just to also comment on that, this point wasn't made for those people who understand why Germany should help Ukraine. This point was clearly made for those, machine kind of people that are like, hey, maybe we should stop, because it's hurting our economy. No, it's not. It's if you stop, then it's going to hurt even more. So yeah, please don't get it as us trying to be these machine people. No.
Thank you. Can you hand it over?
Since we have the mic in this corner, I wanted to ask a question for Ivan. And I thought the slide that you showed was really interesting about German stockpiles and what's happening to them, the units they ordered, the units they're giving to Ukraine. I was wondering if you're tracking how fast the ordered units come in And related is the question, like, are you looking into production capacities? Because it seemed like the limiting factor was how much money do we have and how much money are we politically willing to spend. But even in a world where CDU and the Green Party decides we want to go all in, we want to spend as much as we politically can, like, are they even able to get the military equipment that they would want to ship? I assume Trump would be willing to sell it to us if we pay for it. But like, what do like production capacities look like in Germany for the equipment we want to send?
Yes, sir. So these are kind of two questions in one, because one would be what are the production capacity, and another would be whether Germany can just go on into international market of arms and buy things there. The second question, the answer to the second question, it can, of course, but it really depends on the, as you said, it depends whether Trump wants to sell this weapon. I mean, who else would Germany buy weapons from, right? I mean, all the European countries are in the same position, and the first question about whether Germany even can increase its production limits or whatever, it's really hard to tell. It used to be way bigger before. So I mean, but without the money, without any incentives to produce more, it wouldn't even happen. Right? It won't even happen if Germany does not invest. If German armed forces will not post this demand to the industry will never catch up, and this can only be done if government gives German Bundeswehr more money. So this is the first step to build up this industry, and the second step would be to also think, okay, I don't know, like Rheinmetall, we need to subsidize them, for example. Okay, we place this demand and then we help the supply. So it's just a second step, and I think Germany has this capacity to increase. Of course, not to compensate the loss of US in this whole game, but to increase it. I mean, at least, I mean, we had the estimates. We wanted to see how long would it take Germany with current speed to rearm to the level that Germany had in 2004. And 2004 was the year when Germany kind of started this, exploiting these peace dividends. They pretty much dramatically decreased the stockpiles the Bundeswehr had. And so it would take decades. For some weapon systems with current rate, it will even take centuries. I mean, I'm not kidding. You can check out the report. Of course, the forecast is made on the current speed. I mean, the exogenous shock might be there. I mean, I don't know, like CDU comes into power and says, okay, now we invest half the budget into military. Of course, it's going to skyrocket. But I mean, if we take rates for the last 4 years, unfortunately, decades will take until Germany will be ready to the level of 2004.
Okay, thank you. Over there.
A question about these robots, which just think about money spent. Wouldn't it be also possible to take into account net spending? Because a lot of money spent on weaponry or aid to Ukraine actually ends up in Germany or in countries which produce weaponry and systems and ammunition and so on. And yeah, I think for many people which don't really care about Ukraine, which are just, oh, we throw money there and the money is burned and I don't care what's really going on in Ukraine. I just care about the money. And yeah, wouldn't it be possible to estimate how big the net spending is and how much of the money actually ends up in Germany, which we send to Ukraine or don't really send to Ukraine because it comes back?
Well, I mean, it is probably possible. I mean, we have data on procurements. Data on what is being procured from German industry that is then going to Ukraine. One important note here is that even though this money go to German industry, right, it's not a refrigerator or a car that will stay here and will be then used by people in Germany that will increase their welfare. Right. I mean, even if it's a tank that doesn't go to Ukraine, this tank is not going to go to someone else's apartment and serve as, as a mean of increasing their welfare. It's it's gonna just be placed in the military base and will stand there. And it's something that you cannot estimate really in the end, because it's a public good, and public goods are very hard to estimate. Also, helping Ukraine is a public good, and storing tanks in your garage, in your Bundeswehr garage, is also a public good that you cannot put a price tag on it. Unfortunately, if we could have done it, I mean, it would be like, yeah, super easy to then account for all these unobservable, unexpected events that might come to us in the future, but unfortunately we cannot. So therefore we need to really, therefore we have all the debates, therefore we have all these talks, we need to really try to hit the target the best way, the most efficient way we can.
Perhaps if I also may add on that, from an economic point of view, I've no idea about arms, but in case we are in the middle of a recession and we have lots of unemployed, highly educated people sitting around, then I mean, Keynes would recommend to dig holes with these people, and then it's better to, you know, build tanks, right? But that's currently not the situation we have, right? So we rather have labor shortage. So I wouldn't overstress that argument. It's probably for recessions of the type we currently at least don't have. It might be different, right? So now, I mean, all the car makers and all are firing people. So perhaps next year, those people would be grateful to build tanks instead of, you know, diesel cars, whatever. Okay, so I think there was another question in the audience. If I may add a final one, which struck me, that was the arms assistance to Ukraine by France and Italy and Poland has more or less stalled a year ago or so, and didn't change, if I remember correctly. What's the reason behind that? Have they exhausted their you know, stocks, or is it a political reason?
So I think it's, I mean, hard to tell. We do not, you know, we do not crawl in their heads. It seems like they have still stocks. It might be something political, but it's also on the side of the data. Sometimes you see these, you know, like really flat lines, and this is because maybe they give a little bit, like bit by bit, but we just cannot see this. I mean, maybe like Polish aid doesn't look like, you know, like this straight line. Maybe it's a little bit going upwards, but just a little bit. So this is the reason for the flat lines, by the way. Yeah, but we really can't know in the end. Unfortunately, we do not estimate it. But speaking about stocks, they have plenty. Just to put it this way, they have plenty. So yeah.
All right, so it's 7:30, so exactly Punktlandung, we would say in Germany. Don't know the English word. So thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for participating in this very lively discussion. Thanks for our two experts to answer. And well, the prospect was semi-good, but let's hope the best. So thank you everybody, also those online, to follow the discussion. We are back here next week, same place, same time. Next week we're going to discuss, and that's also a very interesting discussion about what scientists should think about activism. And we're going to have a very prominent activist from the Eastern European sciences in Germany, and she will reflect on that. And we will also have a member from how to say, foundation here in Kiel, working on helping Ukrainians, how their activism is working here in Kiel, what their aims are, what their obstacles are. So kind of blending these two topics. And so I hope many of you will be there, will be here again. And next week we are again in German. And so I hope to see you back then. Thank you very much for being here.